So, I mean, obviously, it's The Crown. It's one of the biggest shows in the world, if not the biggest. So, my first question is, did you have any nerves? Because obviously, season five, you've done this before. So, does that make you a bit more comfortable coming back to something like this, something so massive and huge and international?
Uh, I mean, it's the first time I've ever done anything across 2 seasons, and there is something really lovely about doing so. You know, you establish things in the first, and you begin to get into the skin and understand, you know, and set things up, and then you get to deepen that
Yeah.
as you go into the next. But also, I think something very powerful that happens is that also Peter, from a writing perspective, also gets to know you and starts to write to you and with you, and you know the collaborations deepen. Nonetheless, all that stuff set aside, like we always knew that season 5 was setting up season 6, you know, and right from the beginning of The Crown, everyone has been asking this question: will they get to Dodi and Diana, and will that be done? And so, as you're approaching season 6, you know that right now is where we climb the mountain,
Yeah,
right?
and then even like it's a point. It's a hard watch from the opener. Like this is all building, kind of build up to this car crash. It's shown. So what was filming that like? Because a lot of the scenes you're in, when you're in the car, even with all the paparazzi around, you've kind of seen footage of it before, obviously the real footage. But what was that like to film? Did you get any idea of what it must have been like for Dodie and Diana back then?
I mean, to be in a car and have that banging on the window, that sense of being hounded. I remember the first day after we did one of those scenes, and you know, you go home and you're out of makeup and you're getting in the car to go back to the hotel or whatever. And as I was in the car, every scooter that went past, I flinched. Right? In so many of the different details of what we explored, there's always information lurking in places you wouldn't expect it to be. And there are all sorts of various different. In some ways, I find what we did in itself to be a kind of act of research. It's the first time in the kind of history of The Crown and seasons where there is this moment in time given 4 episodes, right? And explored in its spaces and its painstaking details, which are so familiar to people. And I always kind of say that I feel like our responsibility has not been to answer questions around which there is a great deal of speculation, but rather to ask the questions as intensely as possible, right? And part of what you do in exploring all of that is living their reality, which was not a retrospective one, right? They lived moving forwards, like all the rest of us. And so, you know, you explore and experience this element of the paparazzi, and you think, oh, is it that? And you see them making the decisions about, no, I'm not going to do this or that, and the problems with the bodyguards and whatever. Oh, there's that too. And then, you know, all of these things together feed. So but you have your sense of what tethers you, painstaking details, and then around which there is, you know, your sense of how you build, and this is also part of the research for both me and Elizabeth and otherwise, but how you build your sense of their soul, right, and who they were as people. And that you then also find in other places. So, for example, one of the things that really tethered me, was so important right at the beginning, was this question: did they have a falling in love? And one of the pieces of footage that entirely tethers me is the footage of them at the back of the Ritz, where if you watch it, because why would anybody really sit there and watch it? It's bloody boring, right? But there is this 7 minutes at the end where they're holding each other behind Diana's back, and she's holding his hand and leaning her head, and they're, you know, gently nuzzling together, and there is this gentle caress of the hands, and you're like, that body language and the tenderness is the language of of a falling in love. Likewise, one of the things I did is and I really don't know why it wasn't done before, it seems to me. Maybe someone has, but I don't know. But anyway, gathered together all the photos that I could of that time and just put it in chronological order. And when you put it in chronological order, it tells you stories between, and you're like, oh wow, you can see things. And then what interested me wasn't like the famous photos of the kiss, for example. It was Dodi's hand on Diana's face, or her hand in his. And these sort of gentle moments that tether your sense of them. And then you, in the making of this, you're suddenly entering these spaces and these moments that they had, and you're exploring that. And one of the weird experiences I still have is, you know, the film Back to the Future and those photographs that sort of change. So I had sort of opposite experience of that, which is that, you know, at the beginning of this, all those photos and iconic moments and stuff, they were all things that, for me, like anyone else, were just images out there in the world. But gradually over the filming, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember being there. I remember wearing that shirt. I remember being in those glasses. And then gradually you get to this point where over the corner of your vision, it's like, wait, which one's the real Diana? It starts to become part of your family album, and it's somewhere in the space between the surreal and the sacred.
Yeah. Well, listen, I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on the season.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's cut.